In the Venezuelan capital, Caracas, the government has announced that it has foiled what President Nicolás Maduro has called a false flag terrorist plot. According to the president, the plan aimed to plant explosives at the United States Embassy in the city, a move that, if carried out, could have plunged relations between Caracas and Washington into a fresh crisis. There were two sources, one was national and the other international. They were followed up on, and both agreed on the possibility that a local extremist terrorist group had placed an explosive device at the US Embassy in Caracas.
Con la posibilidad de que un grupo terrorista, extremista, local, colocara una carga explosiva contra la embajada de Estados Unidos en Caracas.
Speaking in a televised address, Maduro said his security agencies had received two separate pieces of intelligence, one from domestic sources and one from abroad, both pointing to the same alarming threat. There were two sources, he said. One was national and the other international. They were followed up on, and both agreed on the possibility that a local extremist terrorist group had placed an explosive device at the US Embassy in Caracas. The Venezuelan leader stressed that his administration acted quickly and in line with international law to neutralize the threat. He reminded viewers that regardless of political friction, embassies enjoy special protection under the Geneva Conventions. This is an embassy that, despite all the differences we have had with the US governments, is protected and preserved as required by the Geneva Convention and international law by our government. It is an embassy, like all embassies, that is permanently guarded, cared for and respected. Maduro added that he instructed Jorge Rodriguez, who leads Venezuela's dialogue efforts with Washington, to reach out to US officials without delay. I ordered Comrade Jorge Rodriguez to communicate with the US government through all available channels, Maduro explained. He did so immediately, and the reactions of the people who communicated with Jorge Rodriguez were positive. All measures were taken. According to Venezuelan officials, the alleged plot was detected before any device could be planted. Security services have not disclosed the names of the suspects or the groups involved, citing the sensitivity of the investigation. For now, what is known is that the authorities claim to have dismantled a conspiracy designed to trigger a diplomatic incident and raise tensions between the two countries, already strained by years of sanctions, mutual accusations over narcotics trafficking and disputes about democratic governance. The announcement comes at a delicate moment. Over the past year, there had been cautious signs of contact between Caracas and Washington. US envoys had visited Venezuela for exploratory talks about sanctions relief in exchange for political and electoral guarantees. Energy analysts noted that Venezuela's vast oil reserves made it a potential partner for stabilizing global supply during periods of market volatility. Yet trust remained fragile, and the embassy incident threatened to derail any tentative progress. For many Venezuelans, the news was both alarming and strangely familiar. The country's political life has been punctuated by allegations of coup plots, sabotage attempts, and outside interference for decades. The government framed this latest incident as part of a longer pattern in which it says radical factions inside the country sometimes collaborate with foreign actors to destabilize the state. Critics of the administration, however, often accuse it of using the language of plots to rally supporters and distract from domestic economic pressures. In Washington, the State Department has so far refrained from making any accusatory statement. A brief press note acknowledged that Venezuelan authorities had communicated information about a potential threat to the embassy and said that US diplomatic staff remained safe. Analysts interpret the restrained tone as a sign that, at least for now, both governments want to avoid escalating rhetoric. This is an embassy that, despite all the differences we have had with the US governments, is protected and preserved as required by the Geneva Convention and international law by our government. It is an embassy, like all embassies, that is permanently guarded, cared for and respected. Diplomatic compounds around the world are, by their nature, high-risk targets. Under international law, host countries are responsible for their protection. Maduro's remarks underscored that point, framing Venezuela as a responsible guardian of foreign missions despite its sharp disagreements with the United States. The reminder about the Geneva Convention was also a subtle message to Washington that Venezuela expects reciprocal respect for its own diplomatic facilities abroad. Behind the official statements lies a tense history. Since 2019, when the United States recognized opposition leader Juan Guaidó as interim president, relations between the two countries hit a historic low. US sanctions squeezed Venezuela's oil exports, worsening an already deep economic crisis. For a period, the US embassy in Caracas was closed and staff were evacuated. Only in the past 2 years has there been a limited, cautious re-engagement, largely driven by the global energy crunch and by efforts to encourage political dialogue inside Venezuela. Security experts say that if the embassy threat had been real and had succeeded, it could have derailed this fragile thaw. An attack on a foreign embassy is viewed internationally as an act of terrorism. Such an incident might have provoked calls in Washington for stronger punitive measures and conversely would have allowed hardliners in Caracas to claim foreign aggression, deepening a cycle of mistrust. For ordinary citizens in Caracas, the episode is another reminder of the precarious balance their country faces. In interviews broadcast on local media, some residents expressed relief that the plot was reportedly stopped in time. Others voiced skepticism, asking for evidence to be made public. Social media platforms lit up with competing narratives, some supporting the government's claim, others suspecting political theatre. In his address, Maduro called on Venezuelans to remain calm and vigilant, portraying the security services as efficient and united. He credited the quick response to coordinated intelligence sharing between national agencies and foreign partners, without specifying which countries provided the external tip-off. The broader context is that Venezuela continues to be accused by the United States of allowing drug trafficking networks to operate through its territory. Caracas denies this and says such accusations are politically motivated. The mention of drug trafficking disputes in Maduro's speech about the embassy incident highlights how deeply intertwined security and political tensions have become. Journalists covering the story have noted the lack of publicly released evidence so far. No images of seized explosives, no names of suspects, no timeline of arrests, only the president's televised remarks and follow-up comments by senior officials. Human rights organizations and opposition leaders have urged transparency, warning against the use of national security claims to justify arbitrary detentions. Still, the emphasis on preserving the sanctity of diplomatic missions struck a chord beyond Venezuela's borders. Regional neighbors, including Colombia and Brazil, issued brief statements reiterating their commitment to the inviolability of embassies under international law and calling for restraint on all sides. For students of diplomacy, the incident offers a case study in crisis communication. Within hours of identifying the threat, Venezuelan officials had reportedly reached out to their US counterparts through back-channel contacts. Maduro highlighted that the reaction from those US contacts was positive, suggesting a rare moment of constructive exchange amid otherwise fraught relations. Whether this episode becomes a footnote or a turning point will depend on what investigators uncover in the coming weeks. If evidence of a genuine plot is presented, it may validate the government's claim of protecting not just its own sovereignty, but also the security of foreign diplomats. If, however, the case fades without substantiation, it could deepen internal and external doubts about the credibility of official narratives. For now, the streets around the US Embassy in Caracas remain under heightened security. The compound itself, according to both Venezuelan officials and US spokespeople, was never breached and continues normal operations. Analysts in Washington and Latin America are watching closely to see if the incident influences ongoing talks over sanctions and political reforms. The episode also reflects a broader global pattern in which diplomatic facilities have increasingly been targeted or invoked as flashpoints in geopolitical rivalries. From Baghdad to Kiev, from Ankara to Havana, embassies have at times become symbols of state power, as well as potential soft targets for militants. That reality makes cooperation between host governments and foreign missions all the more critical. As the world awaits further details, the incident in Caracas serves as a reminder of how easily a single security scare can ripple through international relations. In a region where political narratives are often polarized, establishing the facts swiftly and transparently will be essential to avoid deepening mistrust. For Venezuelans, whose daily lives have long been shaped by economic hardship and political tension, The idea that their capital city might have been the stage for a deadly provocation adds yet another layer of unease. For US diplomats posted in Caracas, it underscores the persistent risks of serving in a country where relations with their own government remain contentious. And for Nicolás Maduro, the public handling of this alleged plot offers both an opportunity and a test. An opportunity to project himself as a responsible statesman, safeguarding international norms, and a test of his government's credibility in the eyes of citizens and the international community alike. The coming weeks will reveal whether the case brings Caracas and Washington into closer, more pragmatic cooperation on security matters, or whether it becomes another chapter in the long and turbulent history of mistrust between the two nations. I ordered Comrade Jorge Rodriguez, head of Venezuela's delegation for dialogue with Washington, to communicate with the US government through all available channels. He did so immediately, and the reactions of the people who communicated with Jorge Rodriguez were positive. All measures were taken.
Con Jorge Rodríguez fue positiva, se tomaron todas las medidas.